The roadside diner sat quietly under the fading orange glow of the evening sun, a small speck on the endless stretch of Highway 17. Inside, a warm hush filled the room, the soft clinking of forks, the low hum of an old jukebox, and the steady rhythm of a man wiping down the counter with slow, deliberate motions. That man was Steven Seagal. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a plain black shirt, faded jeans, and a calm, unreadable expression. To most people passing through, he looked like any other middle-aged diner owner. Just a man serving coffee, flipping pancakes, and offering a quiet nod to truckers who stopped for a hot meal and a moment of peace. But that peace was about to shatter. A roar echoed from outside. Tires screeched, doors slammed, and then loud laughter. A group of 5 young men swaggered toward the diner's entrance, shoving each other, blasting music from their beat-up truck. They were the kind of trouble that small towns whispered about, the kind that fed on fear. The bell above the diner door jingled as they barged in. One gang member kicked a chair out of his way. Another slapped a napkin holder off a table. A third whistled mockingly at a family trying to eat in silence. But Steven didn't look up. He kept wiping the same glass with the same calm rhythm. Not a flinch, not a word. The gang leader, tall, tattooed, wearing a torn leather jacket, stepped up to the counter and slammed his palm down so hard the salt shaker bounced. "Hey, old man," he barked, leaning in with a smirk full of arrogance. "Hand over your cash drawer." Silence fell across the diner. A worried mother hugged her child. A trucker froze mid-bite. An elderly couple exchanged a frightened look. Steven finally sat down the glass gently, quietly, and straightened his posture. His movements were slow, steady, controlled, not scared, just patient. Without raising his voice, he said, "Son, you don't want to do this." The gang burst into laughter, loud and mocking. "Or what?" the leader sneered. "You going to write a complaint letter?" But their laughter didn't last long, because within seconds, they would realize they had just threatened a man who wasn't just a diner owner. He was a former Marine. And what happened next? No one inside that diner would ever forget. The sun had already dipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted in purples and deep blues. Highway 17 became quieter as the last of the evening traffic faded away. Inside Steven Seagal's small roadside diner, the warm yellow lights glowed softly, giving the place a peaceful charm that regulars loved and travelers remembered. The diner wasn't fancy, just clean booths, polished counters, and a menu that hadn't changed in years. But everyone who stepped inside felt safe, not because of the walls, but because of the man who ran it. Steven moved from table to table with calm precision. A refill here, a quick smile there, a soft, "How's everything tasting tonight?" To a trucker who'd just driven 12 hours straight, his presence didn't demand attention. It commanded respect without trying. And yet no one in the diner knew the life he'd lived before this quiet one. The medals he'd earned, the missions he'd survived, the battles he'd fought both outside and inside himself. To the world, he was just the quiet owner of a roadside diner. And that was exactly how he liked it. Outside, though, a storm was forming. The rusty pickup truck that screeched into the gravel lot was no stranger to trouble. Its dented sides, broken taillight, and spray-painted hood told stories of recklessness. The loud music spilling from its windows carried the same energy, wild, chaotic, unapologetic. Inside were 5 young men, local troublemakers, a small-town gang desperate for power, respect, or maybe just attention. They were used to intimidation. Working, they were used to fear opening doors for them. But tonight, they were walking into the wrong place. The gang killed the engine and piled out, shoving each other, hyping themselves up like they were about to perform at some twisted show. Their boots hit the gravel hard. Their laughter echoed across the quiet night. Their intentions were clear long before they reached the door. Truckers in the diner exchanged uneasy glances. A father instinctively pulled his daughter closer. Something in the air shifted attention so thin and sharp that even the jukebox seemed to quiet itself. The bell above the door jingled softly. The noise didn't match the men walking in. They barged through the entrance like they owned it. One immediately grabbed a handful of straws and tossed them across the room. Another started banging on a booth table like it was a drum. The third stomped loudly toward the counter, announcing his presence like a threat. Steven, behind the counter, kept wiping a clean plate. His movements were slow, rhythmic, unbothered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stiffen. He didn't even break the calm expression he was known for. He simply observed, quiet and still, like a man who'd seen far worse storms than this. The gang leader strutted forward, cracks in his leather jacket revealing tattooed scars underneath. A long chain hung from his belt. His boots were muddy. His fists were tight, and his eyes burned with ego, the kind that always needed a target. He slammed his hand on the counter. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet diner. "Listen up, Grandpa," he sneered, leaning in. "We're taking the cash from your register, and we're not asking twice." A few customers gasped. One woman covered her mouth. A teenager slipped his phone out to record. The tension in the room grew as heavy as thick fog rolling in off the highway. Steven placed the plate down perfectly centered and straightened his back. His eyes met the gang leader's for the first time. No fear, no anger, just an unreadable calm. "The cash," Steven said softly, "stays right where it is." The gang burst into laughter. One of them kicked a trash can, sending paper napkins flying. Another walked behind a customer and slapped their hat off. Their chaos grew louder, sharper, meaner. But Steven didn't move, not even an inch. His stillness made the gang leader angrier. "Oh, really?" the leader snapped, stepping closer. "You got a death wish, old man?" Steven slowly reached for a rag, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the counter. "You boys should leave," he said quietly, "while you still can." That simple sentence made one of the gang members snort. Another cracked his knuckles. A third whispered, "Man, this guy thinks he's tough." The leader leaned in again, just inches from Steven's face. "You think you're going to stop us?" Steven remained silent for a moment, letting the tension stretch thin like a wire about to snap. Then he replied in a voice so calm it sent chills through the room. "Son, I've stopped worse." The gang didn't understand the meaning behind those words. Not yet. But soon. Very soon they would. Before continuing, tell me in the comments, do you think staying calm makes a man weak or powerful? Which city and country are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. The diner, once filled with the soft clinks of silverware and quiet conversations, now felt like it was holding its breath. Every customer sat frozen in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing a robbery or the beginning of something far worse. The gang leader cracked his neck loudly. A smug grin carved across his face as he leaned even closer to Steven. "You want to play hero tonight, old man?" he hissed. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply rested his hands on the counter, fingers relaxed, shoulders loose. The posture of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of. One of the younger gang members, buzzing with adrenaline, stepped forward. "Man, stop talking to him. Just grab the money." He reached across the counter, trying to yank the register toward himself. Steven moved one hand, just one. He placed it gently on top of the gang member's wrist. No force, no aggression. But the boy stopped instantly. It wasn't pain stopping him. It was something else. Something he couldn't explain. A feeling like an invisible wall, a presence heavier than physical strength. Steven looked him in the eyes. "Don't." The word was calm, but somehow sharper than a blade. The boy jerked his hand back and stepped away involuntarily. "Well, what the hell was that?" he muttered. The leader scoffed. "He's bluffing. He's just some washed-up cook." He signaled to another gang member, a tall, lanky guy with a scar across his cheek. "Show him we're not here to talk." Scarred cheek pulled out a pocket knife. Customers gasped. A woman clutched her child, whispering prayers under her breath. He flicked the blade open with a click, holding it up like a trophy. "You see this?" he said, waving it inches from Steven's chest. "This is how things go when people don't listen." Steven stared at the blade with no emotion whatsoever. If anything, he looked bored. "That knife," Steven said quietly, "isn't your friend. It will get you in trouble one day." The gang erupted in laughter again. "Oh yeah," Scarcheek spat. "And who's going to stop me?" Before anyone could blink, Scar lunged forward. But Steven had seen that movement 1,000 times in training, in combat, in places far darker than this little diner. His response was almost invisible. A shift of weight, a turn of the wrist, a simple sidestep. In one fluid motion, he caught the attacker's arm, rotated it, and guided the momentum downward. Thud. Scarcheek found himself face down on the counter. Knife skittering across the floor, breath knocked clean out of his lungs. The entire diner went silent. Even the gang members froze, their laughter choking in their throats. Steven released Scarcheek gently, almost respectfully, and the man collapsed to his knees, shaking. The leader's eyes widened. "What? What did you just do?" Steven didn't respond. He simply stepped back behind the counter, as calm as if he just adjusted a salt shaker. The youngest gang member, barely 18, whispered, "Dude, he moved so fast I didn't even see it." Panic flickered through the group. But ego is a dangerous thing. The leader stepped forward again, fists clenched, trying to regain dominance. "You think that scares us?" he growled. "We're 5. You're 1. Steven raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want the odds to matter tonight?" The leader hesitated only for a second, but everyone in the room saw it. One of his men, the loudmouth with messy hair, jumped in, trying to lift the mood. "Man, I'll knock this guy out myself." He rushed Steven with a wild punch, swinging with all the strength he had. Steven didn't counter. He didn't dodge. He simply stepped aside and placed his hand between the punch and his own face, redirecting the blow effortlessly. The loudmouth stumbled, losing balance. Steven tapped his shoulder just a tap, and the man dropped like someone had cut his strings. 2 down. The leader's bravado began to crack. Sweat gathered on his forehead. His eyes darted between Steven and his fallen men. "What are you?" he demanded, voice trembling despite his attempt to sound bold. A trucker in the corner, who had been silent the whole evening, finally spoke. His voice was low, rough, seasoned by miles of asphalt and nights on the road. "He's not just some diner guy," the trucker whispered. "That man's a former Marine. Went through things you kids can't even imagine." The gang members' faces drained of color. The youngest of them stepped back. "Wait, Marine. Like Marine? Marine?" Another whispered, "Dude, we messed up." The leader swallowed hard, but ego again pushed him forward. "I don't care who he used it to be. This is our territory." Steven's eyes narrowed slightly. "Respect isn't territory," he said calmly. "It's behavior." Before the leader could respond, headlights flashed across the windows. Bright, sharp, authoritative. A car screeched to a stop. Doors slammed. Boots hit the gravel. And the tension in the diner twisted into something new. Fear not of Steven, but of what was coming next. The headlights outside washed the diner windows in harsh white light, stretching the gang's shadows across the floor like tall, trembling ghosts. For a moment, the room fell into complete silence. Not the calm silence from earlier, but the kind that squeezes your chest and makes every heartbeat feel too loud. Scarcheek groaned on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The loudmouth still hadn't gotten up. 2 others stood frozen, unsure whether to run or reach for the knife that now lay under a booth. The leader, tattooed angry, breath unsteady, took 1 step back from the counter. Just 1. But everyone saw it. He wasn't attacking anymore. He was calculating, trying to decide whether pride was worth a broken body. Steven didn't look at him. Instead, he knelt and picked up the fallen knife, wiping the blade clean with a napkin before folding it shut. The gesture wasn't threatening. It was almost tidy, like he was cleaning up a small mess. The leader watched, throat tightening. "Why are you so calm?" he muttered. Steven placed the knife on the counter and said, "Because you boys don't scare me. Chaos doesn't scare me. I've seen worse storms than the ones you bring." The youngest gang member, barely old enough to shave, stumbled backward, whispering under his breath. "Bro, I told y'all, We shouldn't have come here. A mother at a corner booth held her child tight, whispering, "It's okay. He's got it under control." Even she wasn't sure who she meant by he, Steven, or the situation itself. A pair of truckers exchanged glances. One of them leaned toward the other and whispered, "I've heard stories about him. Didn't think they were real." The leader snapped at his crew, trying to regain control. "Get up!" "We're not done," I said. "Get up." But no one moved. One man lifted his head off the ground and groaned. "Man, I felt like I got hit by a truck." Scarred Cheek spoke through clenched teeth. "He didn't even hit you, idiot. He just touched you." Their voices shook. Their confidence cracked. The whole diner could feel the shift, like predators suddenly realizing they were prey. Steven walked from behind the counter, wiping his hands with a towel. His steps were slow, deliberate, almost gentle. There was no anger in his walk, only disappointment. He stopped in front of the leader, who instinctively stepped back again. "I warned you," Steven said. "I asked you to leave peacefully." The leader's voice cracked. You're nobody, man. You think you're some kind of hero?" A low laugh came from a booth near the jukebox. An old man, thin, wrinkled, wearing a veteran's cap, stood up with effort. He leaned on his cane and stared directly at the gang leader. "He's not a hero," the old man said. "He's a former Marine. One of the good ones. The kind you don't want to provoke. The kind who doesn't brag about what he's done, because he doesn't have to." The gang stiffened. Steven said nothing, but his silence confirmed everything. The leader's jaw tightened. "No way," he said, though the quiver in his voice betrayed the lie. "If he was a Marine, why is he flipping burgers in some cheap diner?" Another customer answered before Steven could. A middle-aged trucker leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You don't get it, kid. Men like him don't need to prove anything. Some people retire from war to find peace, and you idiots brought war right to his door." The gang exchanged terrified glances. One whispered, "I ain't fighting a Marine." "Nope, I'm out." He backed toward the exit until he hit a chair. Steven watched him without emotion. "No one needs to get hurt," he said quietly. "Walk out now, all of you, before things go further." But the leader wasn't ready to let go. His pride wouldn't let him. His face twisted, and he pointed a shaking finger at Steven. "This ain't over. I run this town. You hear me? We run this place." Steven stepped forward just one step, and the leader instantly shut his mouth. Then Steven said something that hit the gang harder than any punch could. "You don't run anything. People fear you because you give them no choice. True respect isn't forced. It's earned." The leader swallowed hard, staring at the floor. Just then, the headlights outside flickered again. This time, voices followed. "Sheriff's Department. Anyone inside, stay where you are?" The gang froze. Customers exhaled in relief. Steven simply sighed, almost disappointed that this night had to end this way. Boots approached the door. Doors slammed. Radios crackled. Shadows moved past the windows. The gang leader whispered, "Oh no. No. We're screwed." For the first time that evening, Steven cracked a faint smile. "Now you boys really should have listened." The diner door swung open, and everything was about to change. The diner door flew open with a loud bang, and the tension inside the room snapped like an overstretched wire. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the sound of police radios and the heavy footsteps of authority. Sheriff Daniel stepped inside first. He was a tall man in his late 50s, silver at the temples, a deep frown etched permanently between his brows. Two deputies followed close behind him, young sharped, hands hovering near their holsters. Their uniforms were dusty from the gravel outside, and the beam of flashlights cut through the dim diner lighting. The sheriff scanned the room once and instantly understood everything. Steven stood calm and steady. The gang looked like they'd been run over by a storm. Two were on the floor. One leaned against a booth, trembling. The leader looked pale, sweaty, and furious, but mostly terrified. The sheriff shook his head slowly. "Of all the diners in the county," he muttered, "you boys had to pick this one." Leader pointed frantically at Steven. "Sheriff, he attacked us. He assaulted us for no reason." Deputy Harris raised an eyebrow. Is that so? He asked, looking at the scattered chairs, broken napkin holder, and fallen customers. One of the truckers stood up angrily. That's a lie. They came in here causing hell. They tried to rob the place. A mother spoke next, voice trembling but firm. They threatened all of us. They had a knife. The sheriff turned slowly toward the gang leader. Is that true? He asked. The leader's lips trembled. I don't know what they're talking about. Scar-Cheek groaned from the floor. He's lying. We messed up. I told him not to do it. The leader shot him a glare. Shut up, man. But it was too late. The sheriff's expression hardened. I told you boys weeks ago. One more incident and I'd make sure all of you spend some time cooling off in a cell. Deputy Harris nodded toward Steven. What we need to know is, did you start anything, Seagal? Steven wiped his hands on a towel, his voice low and calm as always. They asked for the cash drawer. I told them no. They insisted. One pulled a knife. The deputies exchanged looks not of suspicion, but of recognition. Sheriff Daniels let out a long sigh. Well, he said, sounds about right. The leader snapped. What do you mean? Sounds about right? Aren't you going to arrest him? The sheriff stared at him for a long moment, then laughed not loudly, but with the kind of sound that carried disbelief. You must be new around here, Sheriff Daniels said. Son, that man has saved more lives than you've ruined. The leader blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Deputy Harris stepped forward. Steven Seagal isn't just some diner owner. He gestured towards Steven with respect, the kind of respect that didn't need an explanation. He's a former Marine, one of the best tactical instructors we ever had. Half our department trained under him. The gang froze. The leader's jaw dropped. You were lying. The sheriff shook his head. No kid. I only wish we had 10 more like him. The youngest gang member whispered, Man. We tried to rob a Marine instructor. His voice cracked like he was about to faint. Even the other customers looked at Steven in a new light. The elderly veteran with the cane nodded proudly. Told you boys he wasn't someone to mess with. Scar-Cheek put his hands up in defeat. Okay, Sheriff. I'm done. Arrest us. Whatever. Just keep him away from me. The sheriff chuckled. You're safer next to me than you were trying to fight him. The leader stepped backward until his spine hit the wall. Sweat dripped down his temples. He looked like a man watching the last wall crumble. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered. We didn't know who he was. Steven folded his towel neatly. That's the problem, he said softly. You treat people based on who you think they are, not on who they actually are. The sheriff gave Steven a respectful nod. Steven, you did what you had to, as always. Deputy Harris walked toward the gang, hands behind your backs. All of you. The leader snapped. What? You're listening to him? We didn't even hurt anyone. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You came into this diner with a weapon. You threatened a family? You attempted armed robbery? You assaulted customers. Scar-Cheek pointed at Steven, shaking. He just looked at me, and my arm went numb. The sheriff smirked. That's called training, son. One by one, the deputies cuffed the gang members. They didn't resist. They were too scared too. As they were being escorted outside, the leader twisted back to Steven. This isn't fair. You embarrassed us. You made us look weak. Steven met his eyes with the same quiet stare. I didn't make you weak. Your choices did. The leader lowered his gaze. He knew it was true. The sheriff paused in the doorway and looked at Steven with a half-smile. You ever think of coming back to the force? Steven shook his head lightly. No, people here need a place that's peaceful, and I need a life that's quiet. The sheriff nodded. Well, thanks for not wrecking the whole diner this time. Customers laughed softly, tension finally melting away. As the deputies guided the gang toward the squad cars, Steven walked back behind the counter, picked up the same glass he'd been cleaning earlier, and resumed wiping it calm as ever. The storm had passed, but its lesson was just beginning. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the empty road as the sheriff's cruisers drove away, taking the battered gang with them. The diner slowly settled into a heavy, relieved silence, the kind that comes only after chaos has finally passed. Steven stood behind the counter, quietly, setting chairs upright and collecting broken pieces of a ceramic plate. His movements were calm, almost meditative, like nothing unusual had happened at all. The trucker with the baseball cap approached him. "Hey, Steven," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "You've saved our skins tonight." "I just reacted. Anyone would have." But the trucker shook his head. "No, not like that. Not with that kind of control. I've seen bar fights, but what you did?" He exhaled. That was something else. An elderly woman stepped forward next. The same woman who'd shielded her granddaughter when the gang pulled the knife. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to stand up for us, but you did." Steven's expression softened. "You were scared. That's enough reason." The little girl peeked out from behind her grandmother and shilly waved. "Are you a superhero?" she asked. Steven smiled gently. "No, just someone who believes people deserve to feel safe." The girl nodded thoughtfully, as if accepting a secret truth. Meanwhile, Linda, his longtime waitress and closest friend, walked over with a broom in her hand and a stern expression on her face. "Well," she said, glancing around at the mess, "if you were trying to give me extra work tonight, you succeeded." Steven chuckled. "I'll clean it." "You bet you will," she replied, but her voice cracked with emotion. She stopped, looked at him, and placed a hand on his arm. "You okay?" He nodded once. "Are you?" She let out a shaky breath. "Now I am." They exchanged a look familiar, steady, built on years of trust. The rest of the customers slowly began helping too. The trucker moved the broken table aside. The elderly veteran steadied the overturned napkin dispenser. 2 teenagers began mopping the spilled soda. Within minutes, the diner transformed from a battlefield back into a warm, lived-in place. The smell of spilled fries and coffee was replaced by the comfort of ordinary life again. Linda handed Steven a new dish towel. "You know," she said casually, "people around here think of you as just a quiet guy who makes good coffee and terrible jokes." Steven raised an eyebrow. "My jokes aren't terrible." She smirked. "But after tonight, they're going to see you differently." Sheriff told a few things while he was outside about your Marine years, your training. Steven paused, the towel hanging loosely from his hand. "I didn't want that getting around." "Well," she said gently, "you can't exactly stop people from being grateful." He sighed quietly. "I'm not looking for attention." "I know," she said, touching his shoulder briefly. "But you earned respect tonight, the kind you don't hide from." Before he could respond, the door jingled again. Only this time, it wasn't trouble. It was Sheriff Daniels stepping back inside with a thoughtful expression. "Forgot to tell you something," he said. Everyone in the diner turned. The sheriff approached Steven and crossed his arms. "Those boys," he said, gesturing toward the road. "They told me something interesting while being loaded into the car." Steven cleaned his hands on the towel. "What did they say?" "That you didn't hit them the way they claim." The sheriff smirked. "Said it felt like their own bodies were fighting against them. Said you disarmed them before they even blinked." Steven said nothing. Linda smirked. "That's called skill." The sheriff leaned closer. "You ever think of teaching again?" "Not full-time. Just a weekend course for my deputies. They could use someone like you." Steven hesitated. Memories flickered. Training fields, heavy boots, shouting commands, young recruits making their first mistakes, the weight of responsibility. "I left that life behind," he said quietly. "I know," the sheriff answered. "But maybe you didn't leave it for good. Maybe you just needed a place to breathe." Steven considered that. The sheriff headed for the door. "Think about it," he said, adjusting his hat. "And Steven, you did good tonight. Really good." With that, he left. As the door closed, Linda nudged him lightly. "You should do it," she said. "It's who you are." Steven looked around the diner at the people smiling, thanking him, helping each other, rebuilding the peace he tried so hard to maintain. "This diner is who I am now," he said. "In teaching?" she asked. He paused, then smiled faintly. "Maybe it can be part of it." Linda grinned. "I knew you'd come around." The last of the customers thanked Steven before heading out into the cool night air. One by one, they left until only Linda and Steven remained. He turned off the neon open sign, casting the diner into a soft, warm glow. "You go home," Steven said. "I'll finish the cleaning." Linda shook her head, "No. After tonight, I'm not leaving you alone." They cleaned together in comfortable silence. Outside, the night had finally settled. Peaceful. Still, the kind of peace Steven had fought years to find. But now, he understood something. Sometimes peace isn't the absence of trouble. Sometimes it's knowing you can face it and protect others from it. And in that quiet diner, surrounded by the faint smell of coffee and the echo of bravery, Steven Seagal felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. The moon hung high above Highway 17, casting a silver glow over the quiet stretch of road. The diner's lights flickered softly inside, warm and steady like a lighthouse after a storm. Steven stepped outside for a moment, leaning against the railing with a slow breath. The cool night breeze brushed against his face. Linda joined him, arms crossed to fight the cold. "You know," she said gently, "people are going to talk about tonight for a long time." "Let them," Steven replied quietly. "As long as it makes them feel safer." She looked at him for a moment. Really looked. "You didn't just protect them. You reminded them something the world forgets too often." "What's that?" "That quiet people aren't weak. That calm people aren't afraid. That real strength doesn't need to shout." Steven let her words settle. He had spent years trying to disappear, trying to leave behind the noise, the violence, the weight of his past. But tonight reminded him that hiding wasn't the same as healing. Linda nudged him. "You think the sheriff was right?" Steven raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About teaching again. About helping people like you used to." He looked out at the highway, the endless road, the steady hum of late-night trucks passing in the distance. The world outside the diner still felt dangerous, unpredictable, full of people who took advantage of the weak. But the world inside tonight, he had made sure it stayed safe. "Maybe," he said thoughtfully. "But only if it helps more people sleep peacefully." Linda smiled. "That's what I thought." They stood there for a long moment, letting the night settle around them like a soft blanket. Inside, the neon sign buzzed faintly. Steven's Roadside Diner, glowing in simple red letters. A place that had always been a stop for truckers, travelers, and families. But after tonight it had become something more. A symbol, a reminder, a safe spot along a dangerous road. Steven finally walked back inside, flipping off the last row of lights. The diner dimmed, but the warmth stayed. He locked the door slowly. Just as he turned to leave, he paused, looking at the faint reflection of himself in the glass. A man who once fought battles with guns and discipline, now fighting them with silence and restraint. A man who once trained warriors, now serving coffee in peace, but deep down, the Marine in him still existed. Not loud, not violent, just ready. Linda tapped his shoulder. "You coming?" He nodded and followed her toward the parking lot. Before getting into her car, she said softly, "You know what amazed me most tonight?" "What? You didn't lose control?" "Not even once. If anything, you were calmer when things got dangerous." Steven gave a faint smile. "That's the thing about storms," he said. "The more you've survived, the less they scare you." She smiled back, her eyes reflecting the streetlights. "Well, I'm glad you survived enough storms to save us from one." They said goodnight, and Steven watched her drive away. For a moment, the night was completely still. No cars, no voices, just the faint chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind brushing across the highway. Steven looked at the diner one more time. Then, in a quiet voice no one else was there to hear, he said, "Respect is earned by how you treat the powerless, not how you challenge the powerful." He walked to his motorcycle, the engine rumbling gently as it came to life. He didn't speed off. He didn't roar down the highway like a man escaping darkness. He rode calmly like someone who finally understood that strength wasn't in the fight. It was in choosing when to fight. And as the tail light disappeared into the long stretch of night, one truth lingered behind him. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Sometimes they flip pancakes. Sometimes they run roadside diners. But when the moment comes, their courage speaks louder than their past. If you believe respect and humility are real strength, type respect in the comments and tell me where you're watching from.